What we're going to do is we're going to go for just a little bit over an hour till 1 o'clock and then have half an hour break. So the first section we're going to do is an awful lot of things changed in the Northern Rivers from the 70s till now in terms of the way we deal with death and dying. And we'd like to just sort of run through that because we think we really did. Well, we didn't start anything because how old is this process, eh? But somewhere in the maybe the war and beyond, we kind of got a lot wrong with how we deal with death and dying. And so we'd just like to start off with how things changed here in the 70s in terms of death. And then after the break at 1:30, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the subject of death and dying and compassion, and we'll want to involve you all in any stories you've got to share. So, okay, let's go. So, I'd love to introduce you to Paul, and Paul's my partner, and we're going to start with telling you our story, which happened in 1979.
I was in Sydney, I was working, shooting for Film Australia, and Jenny was home, and she wasn't home. She was in the hospital, and I got the phone call first, and then I got the second phone call that said our baby daughter of 13 months had died in a motor accident involving Jenny. Well, we all, probably all here know how that feels to be shocked into that sense of impermanence. And so we came back here and I went to see Jen in the hospital, and I arrived in the late evening on the last flight from Sydney. The last time I'd seen Emma was a few days before, and I wanted to see her. Didn't care what she looked like, the very little older, so that we could expect anything. And so I said, I'd like to see my daughter to the senior sister on duty, and she looked appalled. She looked appalled at me. Oh, I was quite happy to see her pulled out of a drawer in the morgue. It didn't matter. And she said, leave it with me. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the controller at the time of Lismore Base Hospital came up to see us, and I was told later by the same senior sister, they wanted to make sure that we weren't some kind of weirdos. And so he left without telling me what his decision was, and at about 6:30 in the morning, of course, we weren't sleeping real well. The senior nurse on duty came up and said, we have permission for you to see your daughter. Would you like to come with me? Well,
we were the first people that had ever asked to see a dead body in the history of Lismore Base Hospital.
Breathtaking, really. Anyway, so Jenny's last image of our daughter was one of severe bruising and terrible physical trauma, so she really didn't want to go down and see her again like that. Okay, so I went down and I was amazed at what the hospital had done. There's a tiny little chapel thing down in there somewhere with nice fake lead-light windows and just enough room for a coffin in there. And in I went and they'd dressed her. They'd gone and got some beautiful clean and dry clothes and a little bonnet to hide the damage to her skull. And there she was, looking as people do after they've passed away, looking very peaceful and quite beautiful. I was blown away. Anyway, that was Lismore Base Hospital's response after this rather strange request that came to them. And so I was very appreciative. I went back upstairs and told Jenny that it was quite a beautiful experience, and I saw her and she looked beautiful. Now, do you want me to continue? Yeah.
Then the next phase was Paul and I decided we really didn't want an undertaker. We wanted to deal with it ourselves. We didn't quite know what that meant or how that would be, but that's what we wanted to do. And we were good friends with Graham Dunstan, and Graham Dunstan had done a lot of work with John and Sue Fox, who are theatre people in Cumbria in England, and they'd been here doing some extraordinary things. And he said, well, look, if you don't want to use an undertaker, why don't we just do it ourselves? Okay, so we'll just do it ourselves. So we decided that we didn't want to go into the crematorium either, and a lot of things happened before that. And that a lot of people offered to make a coffin, including Mira's son, Mark Elliott, who was here playing his saxophone, and some of you might have seen in earlier sessions, and he's gone home now. But he knew that she loved birds. In fact, the last thing that she said in her life, because she was an amazing speaker, she could speak whole sentences and even say hello with people's names. It was quite extraordinary how she was like that. And the very last thing she said before she died was, "My birds come." So Mark carved a bird flying out of this handmade coffin, which maybe, I don't know how many people made the coffin. You talk.
Yeah. Well, Dudley Legan had some lovely timber, and Mark and Marcus Jackson, he helped put it together. He was a good woodman. 4 or 5 people built it. So we took it to Lismore and put it in the office of a chiropractor that was around at the time, Colin Locke. And they didn't, at the hospital once again, they didn't quite know what to do. That wasn't going to be a hearse taking the baby away. Yes, okay. Okay, do I need to backtrack there a little bit? Yes, I will. So, okay, we don't want to use the crematorium's chapel. There's nothing wrong with the chapel, except that it has, if you've experienced it yourselves, a real aura of grief. You go in there and you immediately feel really quite sad and upset. And so we felt like we didn't want that. So I approached the manager and said, "Can we have our ceremony out in the garden, please?" Once again, never, ever had that request before. And so that's what we did. Family in a circle about as big as this, about as many people, a little coffin in the middle of it. And we held our ceremony, family spoke, and we did what we do at these events, and then we carried the baby, the little coffin in, and put it on the thing that carries it away. Yes.
Okay, just going back a little minute. Before we put Emma in the coffin, I'd like Mira to tell you the story of what she did.
I washed her and dressed her. They just brought the drawer out, and there she was. And so it felt like, all the babies I've ever known was in that little baby. And Paul and Jenny at this time would be making the Birth and Beyond film. And I just feel there's something that never leaves me, and I guess it's not an uplifting thought, but when I think of, when I think of Jenny, when the accident happened with the car, someone put the spare tire back wrong in a Land Rover, and so it flipped. And I just think of Jenny running along the road with Emma. Sometimes people just passing her in cars, holding her dying baby. I never ever get over that, Jen. Sorry. And then we went to and had a beautiful circle at the land of Paul and Jenny's land, and that's still there, Emma's circle.
And when Mira picked her up from the hospital, she did so in a piece of silk that had been blessed by the Dalai Lama. And she brought her over to the chiropractor shop, who'd let us kind of dress her there because they wouldn't let us do that in the hospital. They wanted us to take her away. And so we got Colin Locke to give us his chiropractic place, and Mira brought her there in the Dalai Lama silk, and we put her in the coffin that the boys had made in the butter factory down there. And Paul and I were then alone with her for a little while, and I saw that she looked like an angel, which she really did look like an angel, didn't she?
Yeah, I'm sure she's a bodhisattva.
So she looked like an angel, and that was reassuring because when she was dying, she looked like a bruise. I could just see that colour of a bruise all around her, and that was quite more upsetting than almost anything, was just that colour around her. Anyway, we put her in the coffin, and Paul and I put a prayer in with her. Not a religious prayer, a prayer about love and light returning to earth. And we were sort of worried after she died about who had taken her, like who was looking after her, because she was only a little baby, really, 13 months old. I was still breastfeeding her. And so it was a concern, who's looking after her? And yeah, I'll let Paul go.
The prayer's called the Great Invocation from a Tibetan master. Very beautiful prayer. I don't think I could recite it for you now. It's not very long, but it's quite beautiful. It was a bookmark out of some Tibetan spiritual books from Lucis Publications. So Jen had this thought prior, and she had this, and she put it in Emma's hands. Now, I think I'm going to continue an extraordinary thing that happened about 3 years after. We were working on a film, very interesting film actually, on reincarnation. We were in France, and it involved regression therapy through hypnotherapy, dealing with phobias. And this woman had gone back very clearly to a previous life in Germany, where she'd never actually been before. And she came from Australia but born in Britain. And she said, "I can't go yet. I've got a message for you from Emma." Oh, okay. So we sat down, had a cup of coffee with her, and she said, "Emma wants to thank you for the prayer." And she's with Poppy. Now, Poppy was the name my two sons gave their grandfather. He passed away before Emma was born. But he was with Poppy, and she thanked us for the prayer. We thought that was pretty amazing.
So the whole experience was a very new one for Nimbin, and because everyone knew us so well, and because everyone knew this gorgeous little baby so well, the kids used to fight about carrying her at the Shannon Market. We'd have Shanti and Ebony lined up, and Jeanette's little girl, Jasmine, lined up to carry her at the Shannon Market the minute she arrived. She was pretty special like that. So we did a beautiful ceremony at the crematorium, and we just made it up, and I think it had quite a few things from Carl Gibran and other writings and songs and musicians. And then we did a kind of ceremony back at our place, at our actual house, and Mira had got a pendulum and worked out where we should do this. And it was sort of interesting because quite a long time after, a biodynamic farmer called Hugh Lovell was looking for a place to put, what are they called?
A field broadcaster, a bit of a cosmic agricultural toy which helps your land to sort of grow and increase in health.
Anyway, it was almost the same place, which was pretty uncanny in a 150-acre block. But there it was. And we went down to that spot, and we had her ashes, and we did a really beautiful ceremony there. And just by chance, it wasn't really designed. So many people who came bought trees, and we all planted an Emma forest together. And other people came and made soup, and just out of the blue, the community just rallied. And I've always found that in this community, when the chips are down, people rally in all sorts of ways that you didn't even know they could, and they do, and it's a very special thing that happens, and that happened for us, which we're very grateful for. And I know it happened in the floods and the fires. You know, people are wonderful at rallying here and sharing their very special skills and talents and love. Yeah, so that's pretty much our story. And we're going to ask Gay Longmuir to share her story as well, because it involves another aspect that was very different.
Thanks, Paul and Jenny. I've got to say it feels a remarkably intimate thing to be talking to a group of people I don't know about this, but Paul and Jenny have been long friends of Ian and I, and when our daughter Hannah, who had just turned 26 and was celebrating that she had finally got her European passport, and she and her boyfriend were planning to go to Canada. And I don't know, I don't share this very much, but in a curious way, it's such a, it's a bit of a Nimbin story in a way. Hannah died after falling from the roof of the hostel where she had been working for a second summer in Athens. And in my associative mind, I immediately think of my favourite photo, one of my favourite photos of her, which is with the exquisite pair of white wings that she bought with her first ever pay packet. And I thought, that says a lot about her, maybe her taste. And yeah, I guess I just offer that because there's a little of the, you know, we can all imagine our children as angels, and we all know that children, like all of us, are an incredibly mixed bag. But it was very devastating when Hannah fell to her death from this high place where she shouldn't have been, and she was with her boyfriend, and it was that dreamy state of, they probably had a bit much to drink, but they'd been making love. And the man who found her was like, he said he'd had hundreds of people working with him over all the years that he'd had this hostel in Athens, and Hannah, and she would have done well, I know she did a stunning job of it because I was there seeing her, and she was really in her element. She ran the bar, and of course there were heaps of young travellers, and they were all having a good time, and she was a very gregarious, huge smile, you know, deeply interested in people and deeply interested in creating hospitality and have people having a good time. And yeah, I suppose it's just our life is full of those little moments where, we take a turn this way and something utterly different happens. And, you know, her boss had given them both a night off, and they were going to have dinner with friends, and then something changed. And so it would have for sure been Hannah's idea to do something that was probably a little edgy. And her, you know, how devastating for her partner. Anyway, we had her body flown back, and I remember some of you, at least Saskia especially, knows our wonderful friend Annie Belitho, who does a lot of work on death and dying. And that particular night, I'd been out with a long-time friend and got home just after midnight and had a little knock on my door. And because the police apparently had come to the farm, I was living in Melbourne at the time, and they had been waiting outside, she and my friend Julie Martindale, who some of you might know, to give me this news. And I just remember that sense, you know, maybe not unlike you, that just an axe had gone through my life. And I just thought, I'd be so happier if I could die in her place, this smart, bright young woman who just seemed to have so much more to give. But, you know, that's not how it falls. And Paul and Jenny extraordinarily generously filmed Hannah's funeral. And I remember Jenny saying, when you record sound and you're following the people down the quite steep hill to our graveyard on the farm, that you hear this sort of recurring riff, and that I think I remember it clearly as so many people saying, you know, Hannah really inspired me to take a risk and to live a little bit dangerously, but not quite that dangerously, but, you know, like just, and more just, how do we dare to live in a really full and embracing kind of way, you know? And I often feel like she's kind of a little Davis spirit to me, and sometimes she just jumps on my shoulder like a little Dakini and like, nah, don't get too involved in sort of that problem. It's actually really not true. And I guess I also just want to really acknowledge that Jack and her darling twin sister Nisi dressed and washed Hannah's body. Like they'd had to pump her full of formaldehyde because she was being flown across the world, and I don't know, I think I probably just kind of couldn't quite face it really. But so wonderful to just have all the spirit and we also had a beautiful coffin that was created by Ian, her dad, but Stephen on the farm put some beautiful timber into that, and Clay, who some of you might know, and it was decorated with, and even just seeing this swarm of beautiful young people who'd known her all her life, and a lot of the young men were, she was just 26, so they would have been in their late 30s or so, but this, and we had her as an open coffin, and I could just see, particularly with these small children, just kneeling around their old friend who, just like that, was just dead. And I think it was an incredibly profound thing to share that. And I remember reading just a piece that for me was incredibly beautiful from Vincent van Gogh's letters, of hearing the young girls laughing and their laughter. And in a way, I suppose for me, it's such a teaching about what actually matters. Where do we find some capacity to be kind and loving? And it was beautiful to just share that old Irish blessing as we put her in a grave on the bottom of the land. And now there's a burrowing right above her belly bone because anyway, that was another story about her naming that came from Auntie Millie, who came to visit before she was born. The community side of it was incredible. Joseph, who some of you might know, who was involved in the farm in the really early days, hasn't lived there for a long time, but was involved in the meditation centre. He came and sat an all-night vigil with Hannah's open coffin, and there was a lot of that, of people just really coming together. In some ways it's an incredible blur for me because I don't recall the details, or someone would say, oh yes, well I was at Hannah's funeral. Well, so sorry, but I kind of didn't notice you. But, you know, at that stage, I mean, she'd grown up there, she was born there. You know, there was something incredibly beautifully circular about being able to bury her. And I was really grateful that Peter Hamilton, who you might know, who was a good, you know, he was 85, he'd had cancer, and I felt really grateful that Peter had died in the right order of things, and he was our first burial on the farm because she was the second. And for those of you who were around yesterday when we talked about intentional communities, one of our key things is to care for each other in our living and dying, and I felt like we were able to do that very well, and I don't know if, I think that's probably like enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. And it was a beautiful, beautiful funeral, and it was like, we were inside, and it was like Florentine colours. That's what I remember more than anything. It's like something out of a Renaissance painting, being there in this rather subdued kind of golden and brown light. It was very beautiful, and I was really moved by the kids her own age in the community that had all grown up since they were babies together. And there was something very beautiful about sharing that moment with them and them with Hannah. So I'm just going to put you on to Mira because there was 2 other little babies that were very moving experiences in the early days of this community. And one was Isabel and one was Fergus, and both of them were really quite huge lessons, particularly Fergus.
Well, Fergus was the son of Saul and Edna, a wonderful Irishman, and his dancing partner. He was a musician. She was a dancer, wonderful character. So they were so excited during the pregnancy. And then the labor went on for a very long time, and we realized this birth wasn't going to happen at home. And it was, so we went to the Lismore base, and after cesarean, turned out Fergus had a very bad spina bifida, which means that the spine is open, and it's very serious. His was serious, and it was clear that he probably would not live very long. In fact, at the hospital, they're quite into just putting him aside. But actually, when we all went to visit Saul and Edna and Fergus, the room was full of balloons and toys, and they were celebrating his life. It was so beautiful. I mean, an incredible loss, but the emphasis on the celebration. And he was buried at Bodie Farm also, which was like very special. The family, I wasn't there, I was away, but the community came around to support Saul and Edna and Fergus. And it was an incredible lesson on letting go and celebrating life. And then there was another little girl, Isabel. We delivered at Ixland Farm, where we were living then, and she was born with a birth problem, a heart problem. And the strange thing was that when she was born, she was like very pink and alive and bright, and the doctor said it must have been obvious when she was born that she had a heart problem, but in fact, she was like just so full of that energy. But then after a while, she was blue, trouble breathing. They took her to specialists, and it was clear she wouldn't survive. So she came back to Ixtlan and died there with her parents, with all of us meditating, the mother washing her and bathing her in beautiful cloths. And that was another ceremony where we had help with coffin and the family community. So those are, and that actually brought the Vietnam vets and the hippies together, because at that time there were a lot of birth defects, including Fergus and Isabel. So we got together, and we used to be, on opposite sides of the fence with the Vietnam War, but it turned out to be there was so much of like Agent Orange going from the banana sheds into the creeks. And a lot of us were living by the sides of creeks with no electricity or running hot water. And that was the case also with Edna and Saul. So we all came together and made quite a lot of protest. And it made some difference about just pouring these poisons into the waterways. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah. Just a couple more things about Fergus. Fergus was a miracle, really. They thought he was going to just live a few days, and he ended up being 10 months old. And he ended up being 10 months old through pure love. And they took him to the hospital at one stage. Maybe he was about 4 months old when they did that. And there was only probably one person in the universe that thought going to the hospital was any point whatsoever. But they did take him there to see if he could have an operation or to see if anything could come of extending his life. And they got to the ward where they had all the spina bifida babies, and there was no parents there. All the parents had left their children because that's what they'd been told to do. They'd be told to leave their babies in that spina bifida unit in that hospital for them to die because there was no point in carrying on. So I remember really clearly Saul and Edna and half of Nimbin in that ward singing to that baby and carrying him 24 hours a day and completely guarding him and his life in the hope that it might be extended. And that taught, I remember all the nurses and the doctors were completely blown out because they'd actually never seen that happen before, because all the other doctors that people had in that situation had all told them to just leave the baby and go, you know, cut your losses. And Saul and Edna were such special people that they just would not hear of that. Fergus was going to be okay, and if they could do it, they were going to make that happen. And it was so special seeing the extraordinary amount of love and hope that they had for that child and how happy that child really was. Really happy and beautiful and bonny. He was really fat and, you know, like whatever life Fergus could have, they just extended it with their hope and love for him. And it was a really huge learning for absolutely everyone. Yeah. Were you there, Graham, at that time? No. Okay. So,
About love involved in this situation. I had a nephew, severe cerebral palsy. The only communication he had was eyes to the left, yes, eyes to the right, no. There was no other control he had over his body, and usually when a child like that is so severely afflicted, no muscle control, you close over like this and you end up with, you know, lung problems that kill you. Well, he lived to 32, really because of the incredible and intense work that my brother and his amazing wife put into keeping him alive. At 18, they managed to finally find a surgeon who would put 2 steel rods down his back. So he sat, from that point on, he just sat like this, you know, totally straight up and down. It was a bit of a trick to move him around because he was a bit like a rigid bit of wood. But the thing is, he survived for this incredible length of time, probably 2 decades longer than anybody would have predicted he could live because of the incredible TLC that he was given. Finally, the weak lungs were what took him out. But, you know, love beats all.
and in Nathan's case, they tried to give him a totally normal life. Like they got him they took him to school. And then after he left school, they took him to get a job, and he got a job delivering lunches and the mails in the office with his carer pushing him and giving everyone the letters and the lunches as he went by. And he even ended up in the Commonwealth Games because they wanted to be inclusive, so Val made it inclusive for Nathan to be there, and so Nathan was there. And it was an extraordinary, and she would hate it if anyone just left him in his wheelchair in a room and we all went away as so he didn't exist and spoke in another room. She would never, ever let that happen. And she just fought for his rights and for the best thing she could for him his absolute whole life. And then she lost him, and then Paul lost his brother within a year. So that was sad. So maybe we should sort of...
Yeah, Robin didn't know where the edge was, so eventually he fell off a ladder and that took him out. Oh yes, the story was about the NDIS. They fought the NDIS from before it was invented. They had better care for handicapped children in Victoria than they did in New South Wales, but he lived in Ballarat, and it's very bloody cold down there in the winters, and he did not enjoy the cold weather, so they finally moved up here when the NDIS became a reality, and moved to a more tropical climate, and that really helped him. But Val was constantly going in to see the officers of the disability people, and so one day she thought, buggers, I'm going to take Nathan with me. The woman behind the desk was the automaton-like computer says no, sort of thing. No, there's not very much else we can do for you. I'm sorry. No, there's not very much else we can do. I'm very sorry. Anyway, the only other capacity that this young man had was to vocalise, and it was pretty loud and pretty strong. And we really knew that he was fully cognizant. We knew that he understood because he did have the capacity to show joy in a weird and unfortunately spastic sort of a way. But as this woman was telling them, no, I'm sorry, we can't help you, he started vocalising really loudly, and the lady turned to Val and said, what's wrong with him? What's going on? She said, he's telling you that he doesn't agree with you and you should help him. That's what he's doing. Oh, all right, I'll see what I can do. They did.
And she's American, so you listen. She's really got one of those really American voices. So I might just put this to Mira, because maybe we try and talk a little bit more of making sense of these things, because that's what you try and do when you have something like what happened to us. Or if anyone wants to talk about any other experiences before we go to that.
I sense that there's like as if a special sadness around losing children, and there might be you, and there might be more people in the group. But also that experience can be so different. Like last night, I was thinking about my experience with death, and I thought 71 in India, there was still the time that people were thrown on the back of a truck when they had died during the night. And then during my activism, East Timor, people hacked in pieces, Moluccas, people beheaded. And then looking after my mum, 14 years, and she had Alzheimer, and she died in bliss, like the night before. She was like with her hands like as if she was doing an orchestra, and she really died in bliss. And I was so in love with my mum when she died. And I had hated her during her life a lot. She was an over-worrier, it drove me mad. And then my sister died of Alzheimer too, looked after her regularly, 2-3 months at a time. She died in agony, total agony. And like you say, the face of a death is an angel. Her face was like a devil almost. And it made me very aware of how we die. And is this a time to, because about the, so through my mum's and my sister's death, I think I got looking more also facing death. And also the value of being with dying and death, that there's something very beautiful and deep in it, very alive. And then I got involved with importing the cooling plate to Nimbin, a community asset, because I find it, the idea that the dead disappears within an hour of the place where they died, and they're hidden. And I think being with the dead and the spirit leaving is so important. So this cooling plate, which is just there on the stage, the blue thing, you put it under a dead body and at home or wherever, and it cools the body. It's allowed legally also to keep the body for 5 days in New South Wales, and you can be around. I remember when Johnny Bales died, Aboriginal guy, I rushed to the home, and there he was laying on the couch, and all the family was around. went up to him to touch him, and the kids came and they touched him. And then they took him away. And it's like, it's shock. It's like I can imagine with, you know, like with losing a baby and it's then taken away. Yeah. And then I went to writing the manual for that thing and then updating a booklet, do it yourself in Nimbin. I'm now grateful to hear your story. Like, we still need to reclaim to do it ourselves, dying and death, and to reclaim that and be empowered and daring to do that. I'm very passionate now because I'm in the middle of writing that booklet, and what it also taught me is like, I'm afraid of dying, but I'm even more afraid of living, to dare to live. And I like that confrontation, that death is making you think about life.
Yes, I've got one more little thing to say, actually. A friend or, particularly a friend or an acquaintance has passed away. You've all had the experience and the thought, oh, I shouldn't bother them. I should leave them alone. And very often we give in to that. Well, I remember when this event happened for us, and there was a real sense of ecstasy around at the time, with like I can describe it as a cocoon of love was around us. Everybody left at the end of that day. It was devastating being alone. But during that period of high sensation, a very good man who's here actually, Bobby Gibson's here, and he rang me and he said, well, how are you, Paulie? And I said, oh, we're really pretty high here. I've always thought about that since. I wouldn't have remembered that that's how I felt with the loving, caring that was surrounding us. But it was, so at that time, shortly after and during the wake or in the few days after, it is actually a really good thing to ring and communicate and pass on your feelings and your loving care.
Yeah. Would you like to say something, Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I've loved listening to all of your stories. Thank you. Thank you. It's the ice cream. Thank you. Okay, so I have always had the belief that the soul is eternal. It lives on beyond this lifetime, and I guess that probably came from my mother, who from a young age would speak to me about reincarnation. She very much believed in the other world, and she had some very interesting experiences, and so she'd speak to me about reincarnation, and so I just grew up just accepting that our souls are eternal and they pop in and out of bodies, and that was just the way it was. And so, but it still didn't take away the fear of death from me. So I have always had this fear of death, and I think we probably all have a fear of death. It's encoded into our DNA, and I'll speak more about that in a little while. But I started doing past life regression about 10 years ago or something like that. And when I do a regression with people in hypnosis and they go back into their past life, and I get them to explore that life, and then I take them to the other side. Or I take them to the last day of their life, and I get them to describe where they are and who's with them, and they always describe great peace. I've done thousands of these cases, and I might only have had one person who wasn't really ready to die. They're all ready to go. They say, yes, I'm ready to go, I'm at peace, and they're ready to pass over. And then I take them to the other side, and out of their body, the spirit has left their body, and I ask them to describe where they are. And it's actually very interesting that I have very few people who are met by loved ones or religious figures. So, we hear about this a lot, that people have had near-death experiences and they come back and speak about them. Very often they say that they're met by loved ones or religious figures, but in most of the cases that I have witnessed, that doesn't happen. But what does happen, people immediately find themselves just floating in bliss and peace. And they're absolutely disconnected from their body. They'll look down on it. It's quite funny. Sometimes they'll say, oh my God, look at that pathetic old bag of bones down there. Oh, oh my goodness, he's so wrinkly and oh. And they're very happy to be out of the body. And then from there on, they go to wherever they need to go. Very often I'll take people straight back to source. They've got a choice of where they want to go. Some people choose to have, probably most people choose to have a life review. So they'll meet up with their spirit guides on the other side or their counsel on the other side, and they'll review the life that they have just left. And they'll look at, oh, well, yes, I could have done that a bit better, couldn't I? Or, gosh, that was, I really wronged that person, or I hurt that person, or, yes, I did this really well and I achieved my aims, what I came in here for. But there's never any judgment. There's never, any big man in the sky saying, oh, you've done wrong, you've got to pay for this. People judge themselves, and from there they might choose to come back into another life to make it up for somebody that they feel that they have wronged, or to grow in to grow their soul wisdom, or to just learn something that they didn't quite master in the previous lifetime. Sometimes they just go straight to source and they just integrate all of their learnings and lessons from there. But from these experiences, it's just given me now an absolute understanding of beyond what the beliefs I was brought up with, that my mother spoke about reincarnation, but a real understanding and knowing just how eternal the soul is, and the consciousness still remains with that soul once it's left the physical body. The consciousness is still the same. They're still the same person, only they're perhaps more of that same person, but they still have the same personalities, the same likes and dislikes, and they suddenly find that they've got so much more freedom, and then it's their choice where they want to go to after that. There's never anyone forcing them to go back into another lifetime. So I feel it's important for people just to have an understanding that we really don't die. We drop the physical body, and it just takes away the fear of death. And another thing too, at the time of death, I've never had anybody talk about pain. I asked them, they might have died of horrific injuries, but at the time of death, there's no pain. And it's an interesting thing about pain too, because I believe it is connected to our fear of death. Now, the fear of death is a program. It's encoded into our DNA, and connected to that is the fear of pain. So people will often say, oh, well, I'm not so afraid of death, but I really don't want to be in pain. And that was me. I always thought, oh, the fear of being in pain or a long, drawn-out illness was what was most scary to me. But that, again, is connected to our fear of death, because if we've got strong pain, it will bring up subconscious or conscious fears. Oh, am I going to die? And here's a lovely way of looking at this, which somebody taught me a long time ago. Because we are light, when the soul comes into a physical body, it brings in so much light. The soul is incredibly powerful and potent, and it's got so much light, and it's what animates our physical body. And if we can just imagine, say we've got an area of pain in our body, and if we can just go past how much it's hurting and just really tune into the pain and analyse it. And pain radiates, doesn't it? It radiates. And that radiation is actually light. And it is the body wanting to send more light to those areas that are needing it to help to heal it. So if you ever have pain, if you just keep reminding yourself, it's just light. It is just light, and it's healing the body. Now this is something else I'd like to share with you all too, something that you can perhaps take away with you and do at a later stage. Because in our DNA we're very encoded with the fear of death, and in parts of our body, whenever we have a surgery, on a subconscious level, we anchor in the fear of death into the physical body in that area where we've had the surgery, because the body might be asleep, or the mind might be asleep, but the body is very much awake and it's aware of everything that's going on. On a subconscious level, it knows everything that's going on, and surgery is very traumatic to the physical body, and the body will feel like it's dying. And so we can just, in your own time, or I don't suggest we do it now, but if you just go into your body, close your eyes and just ask, you can ask whoever you, Source, God, Creator, or your higher self, to show you those areas in your body that are holding the fear of death. And you might be surprised. And then we can just use, I like to use light, and in my practice in my own life I use light a lot. And the violet light is wonderful for transmuting dense, heavy energy or emotional energy or fear. So once you've located those areas in your body that are holding the fear of death, and in truth it's right through our body because it's in our DNA, in our cells, but you can send the violet light, just picture it or ask it to go into those areas and transmute it, and then bring in some golden light and send the golden light into those places where the dense, heavy, cold energy has been. And you can go further, you can go right down into your DNA and just have the intention of sending the violet light right throughout your DNA and every cell of your body, and then bringing in the golden light, because the DNA loves gold. It's got a strong affinity with gold, and colloidal gold is a wonderful thing to take, because it helps to repair and protect the DNA, and that's really, quite, that's been proven. So there's just a couple of maybe little exercises which I offer you if you choose to do them, just to help to get this fear of death out of our bodies, out of our consciousness, and it will help us to depart this body when our time is right. And just remember, we will go on, and we'll still be the same person, only more of us, and then we've got a choice of what we do from there on. So thank you.
Anybody want to share any experiences or wisdom stuff? Yeah, Mirrors.
I'm going to talk about two experiences I had with death. The first is my beloved partner, Tansen, who was Norman. He got sick in Bali, and it took a long time for us to find out what it was, lots of blood tests, and it was a genetic autoimmune system problem, which he found online, and we came back here straight away. And he was put on a drug that suppressed the immune system, unfortunately, but otherwise he could have gone on. The big cells in his artery here were eating other cells. He could have gone blind in 24 hours with no symptoms or pain. So he was gradually coming off this drug and getting better, but he said, there's still something, there's a problem. And he had an MRI for something else, and they found that he had melanoma everywhere, and it was inoperable and incurable. And the doctor said, the oncologist said, well, yes, we can't do anything about it, but we'll see what your oncology team decides what to do. So we just went home, and we didn't have an oncology team. We just really did a lot of work to strengthen his immune system. So, I mean, he was getting weaker, but it was a very beautiful time. He spent a lot of time in nature. He had a bell, he'd ring when he needed me. The family were fantastic. Eventually he got sicker and sicker. We'd go whale watching, looking for whales, take him in a wheelchair, and the whales would just always appear. And when he died, it was a big storm, and then the family were arriving. There was a lot of family on the floor around the bed meditating, and Judy Oppen, our old friend, came, and it was just like, I had to let him know it was okay to let go, that he could leave me, because he'd said, a couple of weeks before, he'd said, I have no fear of death. I've had such a wonderful life, and I have no regrets. And my only problem is leaving you, and you not having anyone to look after you when you die. Because he was 8 years younger than me and much healthier, hadn't abused himself so much. So it was really a surprise. And then so I slept with him that night, and people came and sang to him the next day. My little great-granddaughter, Luella, she wanted to see him on her own. She put flowers all along his chakras, and she had a toy telephone, and she came out and said, I've just been talking to Tansen. He said, don't cry, be happy. And she said, I can see he's a rainbow. And you know, this is like how the universe works. At that moment, a double rainbow appeared in the sky. You know, it's just like these magical things. And Nisi came. I slept with him the next night as well. And Nisi came and we washed him. And then we had to send him to Marnham to be in an ice place till we could do the vigil and the ceremony. So he went in my son-in-law's tradie van with Tibetan flags around it. We didn't use a hearse or anything. It was so I don't know, there was this, because he was a very funny guy, there was this feeling of, you know, sort of joy around it. He came back, and we did an all-night vigil, and then the tradie van took him to the cemetery, and we were even allowed to go to the back of the cemetery and see the body burning. So it was a bit like being in India with the Ghats, you know. And it was a very just extraordinary, and it's such a mystery, you know. I feel that he's with our master, Papaji, and I've had amazing experiences, especially we all, about 24 of us mostly, family, went to India to throw his ashes in the Ganga. But I've had these like experiences where he's like oneness beyond any words, and other very personal ones where he'll sort of direct me to something I've lost or something he's like there, and I just get this impression of him. So it was, I miss him terribly, but he's also very there. I really feel there is no death and there's no separation. And the emphasis with our master was basically, you're never born, you never died. You're not the mind, you're not the body. Find out who you really are, which is, you know, your real self, and unaffected by all the samsara that comes and goes. But the other thing, if it's not too long, I want to share is Tansen and I, my grandson, Sai, but I've got 4 kids, 8 grandkids, 8 great-great-grandkids, and 4 kids. I've got 4 kids, 8 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren. So there are 5 generations of us. But this, we were living in Bali when the Bali bomb went off, and we were 35 meters diagonally away from it. There were bodies all around us. We saved a guy very badly burned from Perth, who has, as a total inspiration, he's recovered from nearly all the body burned, and the skin, no elasticity. It's very strange what happened. He has become an inspirational teacher. 100 people died, and it was chaos. The hospitals couldn't cope with it. It was just total nightmare. And the expats with skills, they all came and started organizing things. It was like really chaotic. And so we started interviewing people, and that seemed to help people, cope with it. It was sort of cathartic and good for us too. And we made a film about it, which was shown on Bali TV. And the emphasis on the film was how the Balinese coped. And they were really extraordinary. I mean, they're strong Hindu beliefs anyway, but they had this, they felt that the whole universe, or their universe, had got totally out of kilter. Something had really gone wrong. And that is what happened to Bali. So they did this purification ceremony that was thousands and thousands of people, all in their temple gear, hundreds of high priests, and incredible stuff. The only thing I didn't like was the sacrifice of animals. But the music, the dancing, the holy water, everything spread everywhere. There's this real feeling of a purification and cleansing happening. And afterwards, it was tangible. You could feel it. I mean, there was all these fallen down buildings and burned cars and chaos, but there was the feeling that they had addressed it in this huge community was really, really powerful. So, it's just seeing death. As a midwife, I just see it the other side of birth. It's a pretty similar stages you go through. And I don't know, I'm 85. I could go any time, you just never know. And it feels okay. I'm just trying to get rid of all this junk.
That's the hard part. Look, we might have a break. And do you think... Oh. Yeah, that's right, and it's time to get some sunshine. I was just going to do a little thing about the comparison between really beautiful endings and one that I was at that was not like that. And so I hadn't been to many funerals, and there was this old coot, and he was a done Bible man, Cole McLeod, and he was a real character, and he never held back. Like, he was pretty hard on people and everyone around him, and he was pretty amazing old fella. Anyway, I ended up at the funeral, and I'm standing there in a big hole in the ground, plastic sheet, and the priest comes out, and all these people that knew him really well. So I was in the back row because I didn't know him really well, but I knew he was an amazing character. And they just got the box and the 2 ropes and put him in the hole, and I waited for someone to say something. They just put him in the ground and said nothing. I thought, that amazing man's life, and nobody here who really knows him well is brave enough or needs permission enough, or I just felt bereft for him that here he went into the ground and nobody had a single word to say. So the opposite to that was our really lovely friend Jeff Dorr died in Birrell Creek, and we made a big circle on someone's mowed lawn in their beautiful garden on a beautiful sunny day and put hay bales around and flowers everywhere, and the boys bought the best Glenfiddich rum, whiskey, and all that. But anyway, we had a bagpiper for him as well. Anyway, I just said to the community, okay, well, this microphone's here now. Anyone that has anything that they want to share about Jeff Dorr, it's open here now, and it doesn't have to be anything special. Just just say what you feel, and then just left it to people, and up they came, the whole community, one after another, to say something about this beautiful man. And then we all took our shoes off, and the coffin went in the back of an open thing, and we went down the dirt road, and we followed it like the Pied Piper, and we crossed the river all bare feet, and then we went up the mountain and following it with the bagpipes, and followed him up and put him on the top of the hill in his orchard, and it felt so complete, so that by the time we'd all come back down the mountain, got through the creek, got our shoes and socks on and all that, and then got the whiskey, and the party felt then a real send-off, because he'd been honoured by everybody, and including his children and my son who he'd help, and everyone had to say. So the comparison between those two, where I felt, oh, surely someone should say something for this man, and I felt it's not my place to say anything, and I was just like, I was exploding with indignation that he was put in the ground with not a word. Thank you.
So we might have a little break. How's everyone feeling? Have you had enough and you want to go home, or will we come back? Or the next part of the session is called Deeper Ways of Death, if this hasn't been bad enough. Now, so I don't quite know. Deeper Ways of Death. Yeah. But that's open. We can change it. No one's telling us what to do, really. So how do you feel? Do you want to come back in half an hour for another hour or something? Okay. Well, we don't really know until we say it. I think it involves whatever we want to say. But, I do have some things, because with our little girl, I sort of felt like, even though she was 13 months old, it was meant to be. And it's weird that you can think that. And the whole time thing of it was very, very strange. Anyway, I'll tell you that after a break.